There is something harder to resist than cruelty. It's kindness. It's a voice that slows down when it speaks to you, a tone that places each word with extra care, a smile that waits while you finish your sentence, as if each exchange was slightly complicated and you needed the extra time. And you hear perfectly, and you understand everything immediately, and yet you smile and nod, because to object would feel like refusing someone's goodwill. My name is Margaret. I am 78 years old, and one afternoon, in the kitchen of my daughter's house, I opened a cupboard and found neat labels stuck to every shelf. Plates, mugs, tea, written carefully, without any unkindness, but meaning, without saying it, that I needed help remembering where my own crockery lived. I spent most of my working life as a school secretary in a town outside Manchester, 32 years of it, managing the timetables, handling the parents, knowing every child's name and face, and which parent went with which child, and which situation required the head teacher, and which one I could sort out myself at the front desk. Keeping the whole place running on days when it seemed determined not to run. It is not work for someone who loses the thread. It requires a particular kind of clarity and organisation that I maintained, without drama, for over 3 decades. After the school, I spent years looking after Geoffrey while he was ill, managing his appointments, his medications, his good days and his difficult ones, everything that needed managing, and some things that couldn't quite be managed but had to be lived through regardless. And then years of managing everything alone after he died. I took decisions constantly, large and small, throughout all of it. I had never in my life needed someone to tell me where the mugs were, or to take over when a question was being asked of me. The house in Salford that Geoffrey and I had shared for 40 years had become very quiet after he died. Not empty, it was still full of his things, his chair, his mug on the second hook from the left, his books organised in the way that only made sense to him, and that I had never rearranged, because I didn't see why. But quiet in the way a house goes quiet when one specific person is no longer in it. Not absence of noise, absence of someone. I had managed. I had continued to do everything, cook and shop and handle the bills and see the neighbours. But the evenings were long in a particular way they hadn't been before. After the fall, nothing serious, I had slipped on the bathroom tiles in February and bruised my hip. I was back on my feet within a week and had told no one about it until my neighbour Joyce spotted me moving carefully on the front step and rang Emma. Emma had insisted I come to stay. She said she couldn't sleep for worrying about me alone in that house. She said it with that particular anxious love I had recognised in her since she was small. Real, completely genuine, the love of a daughter who was frightened of losing her mother. And I had said yes, eventually. Not because I couldn't manage. I could. I had been managing. I knew precisely what I was doing at every point. But because the house in Salford had become quiet in that way that made evenings feel very long. And because I thought that living near family would feel like belonging again to something that was still in motion. If you've ever accepted help from someone who loves you, and found yourself inside something you didn't quite expect, subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. At first, it was genuinely warm. Emma made tea in the mornings, reminded me about my tablets, insisted I rest when she thought I had been doing enough. The grandchildren were loud and full of themselves in the way that children are, and I sat with them in the evenings sometimes, and it felt like it was supposed to feel. There was noise and movement, and the particular warm chaos of a house where several people are living their lives simultaneously, which was exactly what had been absent in Salford. I felt, in those first weeks, that I had been right to come, that it was going to be all right. I tried to be useful in the ways that seemed natural and appropriate. I folded the laundry in the afternoon when it came out of the dryer. I tidied what I had used before anyone noticed it needed tidying. I said thank you for everything, constantly, perhaps more than was necessary, because I was genuinely grateful, and also because I was aware that I was, to some extent, living inside someone else's life, and didn't want to take up more of it than I was given. Emma would say, "You're not a burden, Mum." In the beginning, those words were entirely true, and both of us knew it. Then, slowly, and without a clear transition, they began to feel like something one says because it is the right thing to say, rather than because it is what one believes. Then I began to notice the tone. It didn't change all at once. These things never do, which is exactly why they're so hard to name. It crept in gradually, the way things do when no one decides to change them, but they change anyway. Emma started speaking to me more slowly, with exaggerated patience, each word placed with deliberate care. That particular cadence you use when you're not quite sure someone is keeping up. "Now, Mum, your cardigan goes here. Take your time, all right? It's okay if you don't remember." Each time I would smile and nod, and inside something would tighten, because I recognized that tone from years of watching it used by others, with patients who were genuinely struggling, with people who needed more time, more gentleness, more repetition. I knew exactly what it was for, and I knew it wasn't for me. Emma started answering questions on my behalf when neighbours came by. Not because I had asked her to, not because I was struggling, but because she was there and the answer came to her first. She would repeat things I had already understood, completing the explanation while I was still in the middle of showing that I'd followed it. She would gently take bills and letters from my hands to save me the bother, as if the bother of my own post were something I needed protecting from. During family dinners, conversations would continue around me rather than through me, and if I took 2 or 3 seconds to find a word, the way anyone does at any age on any given day, someone would immediately step in to complete the sentence. Not rudely, not even consciously perhaps, but consistently. I began to notice the quick exchanges of glances between Emma and her husband David. Small looks, horizontal and brief, that said what they couldn't say out loud. You see, I saw them. I stopped contributing to conversations at the table, not because I had nothing to say, I had plenty, but because those glances had taught me to measure how much space I could take before becoming the subject of the conversation rather than a participant in it. I became quieter. I took up less room. I told myself it was consideration. It was, I think, something closer to surrender. Have you ever felt that? Being loved and yet slowly being turned into something different from what you are? Tell me honestly. What stung most was how natural it all seemed to everyone else. Nobody was doing anything obviously wrong. The labels on the cupboards, the repeated explanations, the completed sentences. Each individual thing could be accounted for, justified, explained as kindness. Emma would have said she was only helping. She would have been right that she was trying to. But the sum of all those things, taken together and lived from the inside, was something altogether different from what any individual piece looked like. It was being managed rather than respected, being organised around rather than included in, being treated gradually and gently and without any single person deciding to do so, as someone who was already slightly less present than they had been. I began doing things I had never in my life needed to do before. I read the newspaper every evening, all the way through, the news, the opinion columns, the letters to the editor, following the arguments carefully and forming my own views on them, because I needed to verify for myself, privately, that my mind was still entirely mine. I did this alone, before bed, as a kind of test I was setting and marking myself. I began hiding ordinary mistakes, the kind that everyone makes, of every age, on any given day. A momentary blank, a wrong word self-corrected, a name that takes a second to arrive. Things that had passed completely unremarked for the previous 78 years of my life. I hid them now, because I was afraid that if Emma noticed them, she would count them as confirmation of something she had already decided. I became vigilant in a way I had never been. Careful, deliberate, smaller than I had been, occupying less space, saying less, contributing less, in the hope that less would give less away. This is the part that I most want to say clearly, to anyone who recognises what I am describing. It was not the age that did this to me. It was being watched for signs of it. It was the watching that taught me to shrink. One afternoon, I was going to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet. Emma was in the garden, which I hadn't noticed, and the door was ajar. I heard her voice before I realised she was on the phone. I stopped in the hallway. No malice in her voice. I want to say this first, and emphatically, because it matters more than anything else in what I'm about to describe. She sounded tired. That particular, sincere tiredness that comes out in conversation with a close friend at the end of a long day, when you say things plainly because you believe no one who needs to hear them differently is listening. She said that with older people, you just have to be patient, that they don't really follow things properly anymore. She said it with the easy calm of someone stating a fact, the way you say it will rain tomorrow, or the traffic on the A road is always bad on a Friday. It was not cruelty. It was a description of a situation she believed to be true, and I understood, standing in the hallway with my hand on the door frame, all at once, and without the possibility of reassuring myself otherwise, that my daughter was no longer seeing me as a woman growing older. She was seeing me as someone who was slowly leaving, and that, convinced of this as she clearly was, she had spent months organising my life accordingly. The labels, the tone, the answered questions, the completed sentences, all of it had a logic, and the logic was that I was already a little gone. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry or confront Emma that evening. I ate the dinner she'd made, said good night, and lay awake in the spare room for a long time. A few days later, on a Tuesday morning while Emma was at work and the children at school, I packed a bag with enough for several days, left a note on the kitchen table saying I was fine and I would be in touch, and took the train alone to Whitby. Geoffrey and I had gone to Whitby every summer for 30 years, the same fortnight every year, the same flat above the harbour, the same walks along the same paths, at the same measured pace that became more measured as the years went on, but never stopped. We had last been there 2 summers before he died. I hadn't been back since. The flat had been closed, the key on a hook in the Salford kitchen where I'd left it. I took it off the hook, packed the bag, and went. The flat smelled of sea air and time suspended, that particular combination of salt and stillness that says a place has been waiting. I opened every window. The sea air came in immediately. I stood in the kitchen where Geoffrey and I had made 1,000 breakfasts together, and I stood there for a moment, alone, looking at the kitchen that had only ever been ours. And then I put the kettle on. I made tea the way I make it, in the pot, not in a mug, steeped properly. It tasted exactly right. The next morning I walked to the market, 11 minutes from the flat, the same 11 minutes it had always been, past the same shops and the same steep steps down to the harbour. I bought what I wanted to buy, in the quantity I wanted, without anyone suggesting it might be too much or too heavy for me. I spoke to Reg at the cheese counter, who has been there for as long as I can remember, and who recognised me immediately and asked how long I was staying. I said I wasn't entirely sure yet, which was honest, and which felt like the kind of answer I had always been allowed to give, and had somehow temporarily mislaid the right to. I went to the cafe on the corner where Geoffrey and I always had breakfast on the first morning of every visit. I sat at the table by the window, the same one if it was free, and it was. I ordered tea, opened the newspaper, read it properly from front to back, and noticed that the man at the next table had made an error in his crossword. He'd put a word that didn't fit the down clue. I pointed it out to him. He looked surprised, then appreciative. He said he'd been stuck on that section for 20 minutes. When Emma arrived, panicked, relieved to find me safe, and then almost immediately irritated because I was, she found me sitting by the window in the cafe with my tea and the newspaper, entirely as myself. She stood for a moment before she came over. I know that look. It's the look of someone who expected to find one thing and found something different, and who needs a moment to readjust what they were prepared to feel. I told her, quietly, without anger, because there genuinely wasn't any, that growing old is difficult enough without being treated as though you've already gone. That what had exhausted me most was not the age itself, not the body slowing down, or the mornings being harder, or any of the ordinary costs of being 78. It was the constant weight of being managed rather than spoken to, of being organised around rather than included in, of watching every slight hesitation become confirmation of something that had already been decided, of being loved, genuinely and attentively, in a way that was slowly taking me apart before anything was actually wrong. Emma wept. Not from guilt exactly, or not from guilt alone. I think it was something harder and more honest than guilt. The recognition that her fear of losing me had led her, without meaning to, and without ever deciding to begin the process of losing me herself. That the careful, patient, well-meaning management of my life had been, in its accumulated effect, a form of erasure. That love, when it doesn't listen, can do this. Months later, the family dinners were different. She would start a sentence and wait to see where I was going with it. She would ask what I thought about something on the news and stay with the conversation until I had said what I wanted to say. When I paused to find a word, she would let the pause be what it was, a pause, rather than an occasion to step in. Small things. They were everything. And I, sitting at the table with my hands around a cup of tea, and no particular urgency about any of it, no longer felt the constant low-level pressure to demonstrate at every moment that I still understood the world around me. No longer felt the need to be careful, measured, smaller. I was simply in it, present, complete, the way I had always been, the way I had always deserved to be. Tell me, when the people who love you start speaking to you as if you're already halfway gone, with that particular patience, that careful tone, that gentle management of every small thing, how do you find your way back to the voice that has always been yours and has never stopped being yours? And how do you hold on to it while you do?